Turn on your projectors and follow me down the rabbit hole. JJ Hatter welcomes you to Analysis in Wonderland. Today's topic, the 1988 Czech film, Alice. Ah yes, Valentine's Day is upon us, a time of love and bliss. Romantic songs are in the air, brightly colored decorations are strewn about, and everybody is spending money like mad in order to buy the fanciest things to give to those they care for most. From flowers, chocolates, and cards, to jewelry and other more expensive delights. In this time of love and frivolity, what better movie to talk about than one featuring this, and this, and of course, oh so charming, this. Yeah. By popular demand, today we are talking about the Czech film. Now, the Czech film, as I tend to call it for short, is another one of those movies that most mainstream audiences won't know about, but has gained something of a cult following, especially among avid Karolians. The movie was the brainchild and passion product of noted filmmaker and animator, Jan Svankmajer? Jan Svankmajer? Okay, forget this. I'm calling him JS. Anyway, born in Prague, JS had, since a very early age, always had an interest in puppetry and stop-motion animation. He'd also always been a fan of the original Alice stories, referring to them as, and I quote, one of the most amazing and important books of English civilization. As a filmmaker, he became well known for developing various innovative means of making inanimate objects come to animated life, mixed with an affinity for exaggerated sound effects. He was noted for having an overall style that was, by his own design and admission, intended to be very gruesome, surreal, and unsettling, with a darkly comic edge. Interestingly, the director and animator also had a noted interest in the psychology of children, and many of his pieces were and still are done with a child's perspective in mind, but not in the sense of focusing on sweetness and simplicity. Rather, his films are violent, perplexing, and unrelentingly strange, sort of tapping into the side of children that isn't quite as nice as we often like to imagine. Throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s, JS produced various short films, many of which combined live-action filmmaking techniques with his own unique brand of stop-motion animation, and some of which were either inspired or directly based on works of popular international literature. It was after making the stop-motion short subject Jabberwocky, first released in 1971 and inspired by Carroll's poem of the same name, that JS decided to try his hand at creating a feature-length movie. And what better film to start off with than his own take on Alice's adventures in Wonderland? Much like with Jonathan Miller's BBC TV play, the Czech film was essentially produced with the director intending to, in his own mind, right the wrongs he perceived in earlier adaptations. The biggest issue JS had with other adaptations was that he felt they misunderstood just what exactly Wonderland was supposed to be. A dreamland. A very literal dreamland. This is not really an invalid approach on a surface level. The books, after all, both make it clear that the places Alice visits and the characters she encounters are all in her head. She wakes up from her dreams in each story, and there's no real ambiguity as to them being dreams. This is tied into the fact that neither book really has a moral or a strict plot line. There are certain themes, motifs, and references that can be gleaned from the books, some more obvious than others, certainly, but Alice never really learns anything on her travels. Furthermore, while she does have decided goals in both books, the worlds she travels to have very little rhyme or reason to them, with things constantly changing around her at an overwhelming rate, making it hard to keep a level head or fully comprehend what's going on. JS wanted to capture the very essence of a dream in this movie. He didn't want it to be a typical fantasy or fairy tale, but to try and make it feel like his Alice, and by extension the viewer, was trapped inside a dream. Perhaps more appropriately, given the creator's macabre style and darkly humorous leanings, one should say he wanted to create a Wonderland that was literally a chaotic nightmare. And by that definition, this was, by all accounts, meant to be an Alice movie meant more for adults than for kids. Other productions had tried this in some ways before, such as the aforementioned Jonathan Miller production, and certain later versions would try it too, such as the American McGee's Alice games. However, JS brought a sense of style to the project that was all his own, and used innovative and often downright ghoulish puppetry techniques to bring this nightmare to life. He also, it should be said, openly resisted the urge to give the story any real point. No moral lessons, no great thematic motifs, at least none that are especially obvious to any degree. To quote J.S. himself, "A dream as an expression of our unconscious pursues the realization of our most secret wishes, without considering rational and moral inhibitions." Despite getting the inspiration for the film in the early 70s, it would take almost 2 decades for the movie to be actually completed, as it was finally released in 1988. This was at least partially due to the fact that J.S. was still making other products at the time. His last work immediately before this movie was a short film based on The Pit and the Pendulum, which was released 5 years earlier in 1983. One can only presume that it was in that 5-year gap that the bulk of the work on the film was done. It is also possible that there were some political-based reasons for the film taking so long to make, as in 1972, after the release of a short entitled Leonardo's Diary, his very bizarre filmmaking style apparently got him in trouble with Soviet Union authorities. Interestingly, the picture was not released in its home country first, but instead premiered in the United States under the simple title, Alice. When it was released in the then still fused country of Czechoslovakia in 1990, it was given the title Neco z Alenky? Oh, whatever. The literal translation to English was something from Alice. The production features a live-action actress, young Kristina Kohotova, as Alice, with the Wonderland characters primarily managed through intricate stop-motion puppetry. The movie is told by a disembodied voice, at points illustrated by a pair of young ladies' lips, presumably Kohotova's voice and mouth. This same voice is given to all of the characters. In the English dub, actress Camilla Power handles the vocal work for the whole feature. Power would later be known for her work in various BBC productions, such as their adaptations of the Chronicles of Narnia, and even modern TV shows like Torchwood, Whitechapel, and Father Brown. To this date, the Czech film is generally regarded as one of the most revered interpretations of Alice ever produced. While I seriously have no idea of its box office appeal or even what budget the movie was made with, I do know that critically, this movie was and still is a major hit. Just to give you an idea of what kind of pedigree we are dealing with, this adaptation boasts a full 100% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes and an 80% audience score. In direct contrast, the Disney film, arguably the most popular and well-known version, and the one I have gone on record as saying is probably the technical best adaptation in my opinion, only boasts an 81% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes and a 78% audience score. So, wow, rowdy dow, this movie must be really freaking good. A masterpiece, a genius work of art, a brilliant creation that all of humanity should admire and adore, right? Okay, keep your torches and pitchforks on hold, please, and let me try to explain my feelings for this movie. Because my feelings on this topic are very mixed, to say the least. From a technical perspective, this movie really is something of a marvel. Stop-motion animation is quite possibly my favorite form of animation, and the way it's handled here is as magnificent as it is often macabre. The live-action and stop-motion animation elements are blended seamlessly, using a mixture of common tricks and unusual innovations. The interactions between Alice and these animated creatures feel more visceral and real as a result. The ways they manage the magic of this world are also really quite unique. For instance, when Alice shrinks in this version, she actually transforms into a doll. Whether you want to take that in the literal sense of her turning into a puppet herself, or just see it as their way of handling that special effect, it's a fine approach that fits this version well. The different methods used to create the Wonderland characters are also impressive, if at times rather disturbing to think about. Several characters such as the White Rabbit and his servants are created by actually animating real taxidermied animals or preserved animal parts. So yes, whenever you see the White Rabbit moving around in this movie, you are seeing an animated corpse. The same goes for the mummified-looking frog and fish footman. Other characters are handled by taking common toys and animating them. At the Mad Tea Party, the Mad Hatter is a marionette, the March Hare is a wind-up toy on wheels. The King and Queen of Hearts, along with all their soldiers, are depicted by a mixture of cardboard cutouts, actual playing cards, and even some tarot cards. Perhaps the freakiest and yet most impressive one is the Caterpillar. Right before our eyes, on screen, a tube sock filled with stuffing sucks up a pair of glass eyes and false dentures, curls up on top of a broken knob, and asks, Who are you? Kristina Kohotova's physical performance is also interesting to watch. Alice almost never says a word, and Kohotova's face changes very little, but there's just a certain aura to her that makes you wonder what's going on through this little girl's mind, and it keeps you engaged. There's sincerity to her work, but it's a different kind of sincerity. It's not the dead-eyed stare of Anne-Marie Malik, but there's not a lot being done either, if that makes sense. She's not a kind and loving child, but she's not exactly a menace either, and while she takes some things in her stride, there are several times where even she seems unnerved by all the craziness and creepiness around her. In short, think of this Alice less along the lines of Disney and more along the lines of Wednesday Addams. This portrayal makes the mood all the more perplexing and perturbing. On that note, I'll go so far as to say that the mood, looking at it from a technical perspective once again, is well achieved. The director deliberately wanted to make the film a very uncomfortable and bizarre adventure. It's not exactly a horror film in the strictest sense, but it's still deliberately designed to give you a sense of goosebumps crawling up and down your back. Most of this film takes place in dingy, dark indoor surroundings, where everything feels like it's decaying and rotting away. It's dirty, it's old, it's all broken to pieces. It's not clear why this world is the way it is, but you get the decided feeling that something is very, very wrong. Everything around Alice is steadily falling apart, or feels like it could collapse at any second. The numerous depictions of the Wonderland characters and the ways they are achieved add to this mood. Not only is the White Rabbit a very literal animated corpse, but he's also shifted from being the Queen's herald to being depicted as her executioner, using a giant pair of rusty scissors to lop off the heads of her victims. This entire world feels like it's either out to get you, doesn't care how you feel, or just generally feels unclean and unsafe. Just looking at some of these set pieces makes you want to make sure you get a tetanus shot. Looking at it from all that, it honestly seems like the film does everything it wants to do, and for that, it should be applauded. But as I've said before, while most fans may adore it all, I am not most fans. So what issues do I have with this movie? Why do I not enjoy it as much as others do? The answer, my friends, is very simple. I think in some ways it does its job too well. Keep in mind, I have nothing against darker takes on Wonderland as a whole. Frankly, if they do their job well, I welcome them. And other versions designed to feel like uncomfortable dreams I hail as being among my favorites. However, there's something about this particular movie that crosses a line for me. I think part of this may be due to the pacing. It's a very slow, drawn-out picture. It's only about an hour and a half long, but it seriously feels like twice that length, which is almost never a good sign. The Czech title, Something from Alice, may be fitting, because it actually omits a good amount of Carol's dialogue. It seems more focused on the crazy mood than the actual story and text. There's almost no music in the film at all, aside from the credits. This means there are long sequences in the film where the only noise you have, if any noise at all, is an array of sound effects deliberately designed to get under your skin. As a result of this, the whole thing is a bit of a drag to get through, in my opinion. You're just constantly waiting for something to happen, and sometimes things do happen and sometimes they just don't. The fact that the visuals are once again deliberately designed to be unpleasant means there's not really much that's even appealing for the eyes. They are creative and fantastical, sure, but they are more admirable in their construction. And again, I understand this was intentional, but it's still possible to go too far. To give perspective, I must turn to the Miller production. Both of these adaptations have certain elements in common, most notably in the form of the atmosphere they try to create. Both put you in a world that is deliberately dreamlike, if not outright nightmarish, and create a Wonderland that feels like it is falling apart around the heroine. There are smatterings of dark, dry, or just plain random humor throughout each, and both rely on surrealist techniques to create an aura of unease. And both are relatively slow-paced. However, at the end of the day, between the two, I vastly prefer the Miller version. It's hard for me to say what that adaptation does that this one does not, or what makes that one, as strange as it is, a little more palatable to me. Perhaps it's the strength of the performances of the cast, made up of some of the greatest English actors of all time. Kohotova's performance is good, and certainly better than Anne-Marie Malik's, but it's really the only solid physical performance we get. And the voiceover work in both the English and Czech versions is slightly mannered. It could also be the use of a soundtrack, since the trippy melodies of the 1966 TV play make for one of my favorite Wonderland soundtracks ever made, and this one gives you practically no music at all. Lest you think a soundtrack is all that's required, however, while not related to Alice, the original Universal movies of both Dracula and Frankenstein are mostly silent too, once again only featuring music only during the credits. But A, you can forgive the lack of music due to the time period these movies were made in, and B, once again you have classic performances to keep you engaged. Other Alice versions also have some similar points of comparison, such as the American McGee Games or Dreamchild. All these examples tried to create a nightmare of some sort or other, but it was a nightmare you could still tolerate, a nightmare you were willing to go through because you felt you might get something out of it. This film deliberately gives you nothing. No morals, no solid plot, just complete and utter randomness. And while that worked for the original books and can, in the right hands, work for other productions, when something goes out of its way to make you feel uncomfortable and gives you not much of anything in return, it automatically makes it an acquired taste. And I'm sorry to say, it's not a taste I have myself. So with that in mind, we come to the conclusions. Rating, 5.5 out of 10. Another decimal point rating. I know this opinion will likely bother many people, but I'm sorry, I cannot be dishonest. I completely understand from a critical and technical perspective why this film is so revered, what makes it so interesting, and why so many Carolian scholars and fans like it. If you like it more than I do, good for you. The innovative animation style in particular does make this worth at least 1 or 2 viewings, and its steadfast attitude to making this less of a proper movie and more of a dreamlike expedition through the dark corners of childhood is fascinating, especially to anybody who loves the books. But I'm rating these based solely on opinion, on favoritism, and this one just isn't entirely for me. Its disquieting atmosphere is both its greatest strength and its greatest weakness. I respect this film highly. I understand its audience, and I actually do sincerely hope it gets more attention in the future. But I'm not exactly in a hurry to watch it again myself. Top 6 characters. Mad Hatter and March Hare. This is both one of the more humorous sequences in the film and one of the more unusual, which, needless to point out, is saying a lot. I love the design of the March Hare in particular, and the repeated actions and lines in the sequence give it a claustrophobic, eternal vibe, like these people are just stuck forever in a never-ending loop, trapped in their madness. The Caterpillar. Scary, 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 scary! This is all. The Mouse with the Long Sad Tail. This is undoubtedly the funniest sequence and character in the movie. It has nothing to do with the scene from the actual book featuring this character, but it's still very amusing. There's a bit of an edge to it as the mouse begins making a camp on Alice's skull, believing it to be an island in the Pool of Tears, but it's mostly played for laughs and the levity is appreciated. The King and Queen of Hearts. Both actors give these two a rather pompous and haughty attitude, and I love how it plays out, with the Queen being a regular bossy sprocket and the King essentially a posh dimwit. Not much else to say, they just catch my attention. Alice. I wouldn't go so far as to say she's among my favorite people to play the role, but Kristina Tohotova definitely works for this sort of setting. It's hard to imagine a different Alice for this picture. Also, her last line in the picture is simply chilling. And the White Rabbit. Easily the most iconic character from this version and possibly the most disturbing, the rabbit's role is expanded in this version, meaning we get a lot of time to get to know him, at least as well as we know anybody in this absurd little acid trip. I like the more villainous depiction of the character here, and he steals the show whenever he's on screen, for better or worse. Easily one of my favorites, and the best part of the film without question. What other wonders await you down the rabbit hole? Join me next time to find out. This is JJ Hatter, and never forget, we're all mad here.